My parents are old and finally decided to divorce. Parents who have entered old age decide to divorce, which is a reality that more and more people are facing. Beijing, China, has released a set of data. In the 5 years from 2016 to 2021, nearly half of the divorce litigation cases accepted were for people over 60 years old. In South Korea, as early as 2012, the divorce rate for couples over 50 exceeded that of the younger generation. Last week we launched a call to explore what happens to couples and their children when they divorce in old age. We received nearly 200 online responses, and the discussion about elderly divorce was mostly filled with voices of encouragement and admiration. It's never too late to leave an unsuitable partner, but in fact, what people face is far more complicated than imagined. In nearly 200 applications, we found that twice as many divorces were explicitly filed by the mother as by the father. Under the patriarchal social structure, women suffer more losses and struggles in marriage. When the responsibility of parenthood ends, mothers are often more eager to escape and start a new life. The unavoidable fact is that when a new life begins, parents are no longer young, and their children have been trapped in bad family relationships for too long. Some damage falls irreversibly on everyone, especially children. Even if they are in their 30s or 40s and have experienced their own marriages and intimate relationships, those shadows and injuries may not be erased for life. The more realistic problem is that rebuilding a new life is not as easy as imagined, and there are more detailed problems, such as higher pension costs. For example, when one parent falls into a life of poverty and loneliness, children will also bear more responsibility. Behind the topic of divorce that parents always talk about, there are actually 2 generations' deep thoughts on love, intimacy, family, and how we should live a good life. Here are their stories. We have been stuck in the dark for too long. Most of the couples who get divorced have experienced a long and extremely heartbreaking life war, and finally decide to separate when their children grow up. At this time, they are no longer young, but fortunately, one mistake is over, and a new one is born. Life can really begin. At Monica 32 said, "When I was 30 years old, my parents divorced. Both of them were in the system, retired at the age of 60, and got divorced the same year they retired. From the time they decided to divorce to notifying me to completing the procedures, it only took 1 month. They are a typical couple born in the 1960s who met on a blind date and then got married. My father is the hands-off shopkeeper, and my mother takes care of everything in the house. My mother is not the type to accept things as they come. They have always been at war with each other since I was a child. My father's relatives, they kept trying to persuade me to leave, and my mother's relatives kept trying to persuade me to make peace. I was caught in the middle, and I was no longer a human being. I always thought that they would separate after I finished the college entrance examination, but they still survived me to graduate from college, graduate from graduate school, get a job, get married, buy a house, and settle in Beijing. After I had successfully started a new phase in my life, they decided they no longer had to endure it. After the divorce, my mother chatted with me for a long time on the phone. She needed an outlet to vent her exhaustion and unwillingness in the marriage over the years. My dad also cried on the phone. After all, 30 years is too long. How many 30 years can a person have in his life? The 3 of us have been trapped in these 30 years of darkness for too long. They are all doing well now. My mother looks radiant every day, works out at the gym, takes my grandma on trips, and comes to Beijing to stay with me from time to time throughout the year. My dad was never a family man, and I didn't talk to him much on the phone in the past few years, but he was quite carefree, traveling between the Northeast and Hainan. My husband's grandma passed away last month, and we went home to attend the funeral. My parents insisted on helping me earn face on this occasion. They showed up together during the funeral to help with everything. 2 people can also chat politely and exchange pleasantries. My parents' divorce was not the end of the world for me, but an option to restart my life. At 33 said, my parents have been quarreling for as long as I can remember. My mother is very strong and my father is gentle but relatively silent at home. My father is a romantic person and has been liked by various aunties since he was a child. My mother is very serious. Although it was each other's first love, Their original families were completely different. Their mother grew up in the countryside and could not afford to eat or go to school when she was a child. Her father grew up in the city and was not rich, but his grandmother took good care of him. The values are completely different. I remember that my mother always lost her temper. Every time she got angry, my father would leave and wait for my mother to fall asleep before quietly coming back. When I was admitted to college, I was determined to leave the province, leave home, and leave my parents. It was not until 10 years later that I returned to my hometown to pursue my career. In the past 10 years, I have gone abroad, divorced, and lost my job. When I returned home, I found that my parents were still inseparable. My father still didn't come home. My mother loved him but couldn't express it. She often pushed him further and further away, which would also pass on her anxiety to me. It wasn't until 2 years ago that they finally decided to divorce. Facing their divorce, my first feeling was that they were finally relieved, and to a certain extent, I was even more relieved. Now, my father has remarried, and my mother has remained single. She is in good spirits, but occasionally feels lonely and still has a tough mouth. After I experienced divorce myself, and then when I saw my parents getting divorced, I felt that being together is fate and karmic debt. Sometimes the fate is gone when it is paid off. No matter what the situation is, I hope everyone can be happy. An anonymous bump in 30s said, after her mother retired, she divorced her second husband, who was one step older than her. Although it was surprising, it was also a relief. Surprisingly, I have been repeatedly persuading her to make this decision over the years. When I thought she might have entered middle age and just accepted the reality, she secretly divorced. They told me 3 months later. After the divorce, my mother lived alone, with a cat at home to keep her company. I worked out of town and would come home to visit her regularly. She also has some close sisters who sometimes get together on weekends. That man has disappeared from our lives. From my mother's tortuous emotional experience, I learned to stay awake at all times, to be the helmsman of my own life, and not to leave my happiness in the hands of others, to avoid being stuck in a quagmire and unable to escape. At 38 said, Dad's ultimate dream was to become a monk, and he finally chose to realize his dream after completing all family responsibilities and reaching retirement age. I feel like it will come eventually. It's just a matter of sooner or later. I support my father's decision. I think it is great for a person to realize his dream in his lifetime. Faith has great power. I respect my father. He tried his best to help everyone he could, fulfilled all human duties, and did what he wanted to do with a clear conscience. It's great. At Quest Backbin 35 years old said, when I was 21 years old, my father had an affair and had a child, so my parents divorced. When he first got divorced, my father was very happy, and he thought it was his ideal state, whether in career or in a new marriage. But later, his temper became worse, and his life became miserable. My mother suffered from depression when she was just divorced, but now she has completely come out of it. Her mentality is getting better and better. She has escaped from the marriage and is now more comfortable. She has become the ideal living state of the little sisters around her. But it wasn't until the past 2 years that I successfully reconciled with myself. Originally, I was still questioning whether my father insisted on leaving us because I was not his ideal child. Later, I felt that my father himself was not suitable for marriage. When I was 21, I definitely wouldn't want them to divorce, but now that I'm 35, I feel very lucky. My mother and I have lived the clean life we wanted, but I feel pity for my father's children, who may have to endure my father's bad temper for the rest of their lives. You are free to get married, and you are also free to divorce. It is a good thing to break up early if it is not suitable. In the long run, leaving a toxic relationship is also a good thing for the children. Don't think that your divorce will give you an advantage over the person who intervened in your marriage. Just let them lock you up. The material reduction after divorce is far more cost-effective than the long-term mental torture. At CC 42 years old said, my dad was married 3 times, and I am his daughter from his first wife. He was divorced 3 times when he was 27, 56, and 63 years old. Because we didn't live together, I didn't know about his 2 divorces in his old age. He only told me after the divorce. I didn't feel anything. As if I saw another promotional poster posted in the supermarket. Dad's life after divorce is still exciting. He goes on a senior group trip and goes out almost every month. He has been to Tibet twice so far. He also has many confidants and has lively chats with various Andes. Everyone needs intimacy and a partner, but not necessarily marriage. As long as you have a good attitude and relax, marriage and family are really not that important. At 48 said, my parents are currently separated, and my parents-in-law have been divorced for 5 or 6 years. Let's talk about my parents-in-law first. They lived together for 44 years and were a perfect couple in my eyes. However, when my mother-in-law was almost 70 years old, she decided to file for divorce. Although I thought my father-in-law was annoying at times, I never expected that my mother-in-law would be so determined to divorce her without leaving any room. After the divorce, my mother-in-law moved into a new apartment by herself, traveled with her friends, and had a great time. Speaking of my parents, my mother also insisted on getting a divorce when she was almost 70 years old. But my father didn't agree to it. And even after several years of hard work, we still couldn't get divorced. My mother has now moved out on her own and is living separately, but she said she feels much more comfortable after living on her own. When I was young, I thought divorce was shameful. Now I have experienced the divorce, separation of 2 elderly couples. Facts have proved that even if you have lived together for nearly half a century, you can separate. You must leave to be happy for the rest of your life, at least not sulking again. I think the same way about my marriage. Nothing is permanent except change itself. At Ganghisha, 36 years old, said, as long as I can remember, there have been scenes of my father chasing my mother and beating me, and me chasing my father to protect my mother. This scene lasted until the year I was sent to college. My mother said the reason she didn't want a divorce was that she couldn't hold me back by herself. I said I could make money early without spending a penny, and I just asked you to get a divorce. But not only did my mother not get a divorce, she also gave birth to a younger brother. I can only hope that I leave this home soon. Later, when they got older, my father became old and had no strength. My mother began to take very solid revenge for the injustice she had experienced when she was young. She took away my father's bank card and sent him to my city, euphemistically calling it they came to help me decorate my house, but they actually let me support my father. Finally, they decided to divorce and finally let each other go. After learning the news, I cried for a long time. I thought for a while that I was probably crying about my childhood. Other people's childhoods are beautiful, but mine was not. Now, I just want to live my life peacefully. I had the energy to get rid of the influence of my family of origin, and I had the ability to live my own life. At 40 said, I got pregnant in the 2nd year of my marriage. In order to make it easier for me to take care of the child in the future, my mother-in-law proposed to buy another house in my new housing complex. She and her father-in-law would move in together to avoid conflicts caused by living together in the future. She and her father-in-law had disagreements over housing selection and housing prices. Her father-in-law even regretted not buying a house. Her mother-in-law was very reasonable and said that they could not live together and that they must buy a house and keep a bowl of soup away from each other. The two negotiated to no avail, and her father-in-law finally angry, she filed for divorce, but her mother-in-law couldn't resist and agreed to the divorce. In the early days of my marriage, I didn't understand my parents-in-law's feelings, and I was shocked at first. But my husband said that my father-in-law has always been domineering and arrogant at home. He never listens to other people's suggestions. Their conflicts have been suppressed for a long time, and buying a house is just a guide. Fuse. Later, my husband and I worked together to support my mother-in-law, supporting her in getting a divorce and getting the property she deserved. My father-in-law has been working out of town, kept going on blind dates, had a few girlfriends for a short time, and had little contact with us. My mother-in-law lives with us and helps us take care of our children and take care of the housework. Now that our children are older, she is enjoying her old age, traveling and partying with friends, and we take care of her 3 illnesses and 2 pains on weekdays. They let me see that no matter when, where, or what the situation is, you must be yourself. Once you feel that the other person's views are different from your own, break up as soon as possible. After the divorce, my mother finally lived an ideal life through collection. We found that in the marriages of elderly parents, Most of the people who filed for divorce were women. After being consumed by unhappy marriages for many years, they finally decided to leave and start a happier and more exciting life of their own choice. Life. At 30 said, when my father was 60 years old and my mother was 56, my father had an affair and was asked to leave the house. At first, there was a feeling of this day has finally arrived. And then gradually, there was a feeling of abandonment. I often thought, if I were a boy, if I did better, they would not be separated. After the divorce, my mother traveled around to relax, and my father lived with his girlfriend. The last time we met, he was slovenly and a little sad. Two puzzle pieces that don't fit together should not be put together in the first place. Ad said, in the 23 years since my parents were married, my mother's life has been shrouded in darkness. Domestic violence and mental control were daily routines. My brother and I also spent our childhoods in the shadow of suppression, abuse, and domestic violence. When my mother was 49 years old, one very ordinary morning, she simply packed her bags and left home, moved to the second house she bought a few years ago and started living alone. After get off work, she insisted on yoga, weightlifting, and badminton. She started a new life in a world where no one needed her to take care of or take responsibility, and her whole person showed the youthfulness and vitality of a girl. On the contrary, my father rapidly aged, became haggard, and was close to a mental breakdown in the past 5 years. During the Dragon Boat Festival this year, they finally discussed their divorce openly. They faced each other again, but they were in a state of two generations. I felt the despair of my father, who was old and helpless. It was an indescribable and unspeakable loneliness. I support my mom's decision. In the past 5 years, she has endured too much pressure and criticism, but she endured it all. She was determined to break away from the miserable marriage. She also told us with practical actions, face any choice, don't give in, and listen to your inner voice. When my mother was young, she didn't have a room of her own at her grandma's house, not even a place on the floor, so she had to marry my dad in a hurry through a blind date. In order for me not to make the same mistake again, she firmly supported me to buy a house and let me have my own living space. She made me understand that no one can be my sustenance, and the only one who can accompany me is myself. At CC 34 years old said, my parents divorced for years after I graduated from college. My mother filed the divorce because she wanted to pursue the life she wanted and no longer wanted to serve my dad like a servant until he was old. I support them and hope they each live a free and happy life. But they only told me after we left. I had been lonely and sad for a long time, and I felt like I no longer had a home and a haven. After the divorce, my mother played in the park, fell in love, traveled, and took care of her grandchildren every day. She became younger and younger as she lived. Modern marriage may really be a short-term cooperation, and there is no need to force it to last a lifetime. At 27 years old said, for as long as I can remember, my parents have been preparing for divorce. So, when they really divorced, there was no ripple in my heart. After the divorce, my father moved back to his hometown, and my mother started a life that she had never enjoyed before. In addition to commuting to and from get off work normally, she applied for the adult college entrance examination and studied a major that interested her. They are just two people who are not suitable to live together. Later, during the epidemic, my grandfather was not in good health, so my father would stop by to visit my grandfather when he came to our city for business trips. Later, he still attended his grandfather's funeral as son-in-law. Now, they also have some daily greetings and communication. If they can't be partners, they may become friends. At 28, it was not the elderly parents who got divorced, but the good friend of my 70-year-old grandmother. The old lady wanted to divorce, but the old man refused. And the children also disagreed, saying that they were all over 70 years old, and after decades, there was nothing to worry about. After a long time of fussing, no one paid attention to the old lady who wanted to divorce and ignored her, waiting for her to die down. But after the Chinese New Year this year, the old lady found a nursing home and moved in by herself. The monthly pension is more than 3,000 yuan, and the nursing home is 3,000 yuan a month, almost all in. But the old lady is very happy. Since she can't get divorced, she will find another way to separate. Finally, she is no longer someone else's wife and mother, but herself. Although there are many rumors about this matter in the circle of the elderly, the grandmother still silently supports her good girlfriend. I forgot to say that my grandfather passed away more than 10 years ago, and my grandmother has lived a happy life for more than 10 years. Good things, after experiencing it yourself. I must want to recommend it to my good friends. The old lady lives happily in the nursing home, but the old man is disliked by the children at home. I heard that the children even want to change, send the old man to the nursing home, and take the old lady back. At present, the options of family, marriage, sex, love, and children all be selected separately, and there is no need to follow the progress bar of love, marriage, childbirth, and social discipline. As long as it is the life you want, it is worth living. At 37, the 66-year-old mother made the decision to divorce after the Spring Festival this year. This is her second marriage. After a short honeymoon period of the second marriage, the mother suffered from cold violence for 10 years. She had resigned herself to being trapped in the whirlpool of a silent marriage, but after the Spring Festival this year, she suddenly told me that her life should not stop here without struggle, so she calmly filed for a divorce. After the divorce, the uncle's situation was not very good. I heard from relatives that he had been regretting that he should not agree to the divorce because his health was not good and no one was taking care of him now. But my mother took dance classes and joined the choir. Although she didn't have a high pension, she still planned to take it slow and complete her dream list bit by bit. I support her decision. I think there are probably few women in the world who have the courage to overturn their lives in their 60s. I was surprised and admired. This also made me realize that having a stable and firm self-identity may be more important than what state you are in. Numb, relieved, but hard to let go. When the parents who had quarreled for a lifetime finally decided to divorce, many readers wrote about the same feelings. I am numb. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. I am happy for them. But although the bad marriage is over, the children who grew up in a bad family relationship, the pain and influence are always there. A Yao female 25 years old said, "My parents have always had a bad relationship. I have watched them quarrel since I was a child. When they quarreled, they would even push each other. My mother felt that she married the wrong person and wanted a chance to pursue happiness again. But my father was unwilling to let go. In his traditional concept, he worked hard for this family all his life. So why should it be broken up? In recent years, my father has been working abroad and rarely comes back. Even when he comes back, we always quarrel. My mother went to court on the grounds that we have no affection for each other due to the separation. The court ruling said that they did not agree to divorce and hoped to have a good talk. After the appeal failed, they did not divorce, but they are already people from two different worlds. I feel that I can't go back. My parents' feelings have a certain impact on me. I still won't love someone because I have never seen what love is. I even worry that my future partner will look down on me because of this. Because my original family is not good, I envy others for having a warm and happy family. Every time I see a family gathering together for dinner and talking and laughing on TV, I will cry. That is something I can't ask for. I even hope to keep this family. I don't know what to do. It's hard for me to accept, but I can understand it. I don't know what my marriage will be like in the future and how much it will be affected, but at least at this moment, I can feel the trauma in my heart. At Q7, after graduating from college, I returned to my hometown county in the south. As soon as I got home, my parents started urging me to get married. I thought it was just like most parents, who started urging me to get married when I got older. I got married in 2022, and the wedding ceremony was done in a grand manner. But a few months after the wedding, my mother told me that she wanted to divorce my father. She said that they had this idea since I was in high school, but they just wanted to keep several important nodes in my life, such as the college entrance examination and marriage. I was very resistant at first and strongly opposed this decision. After all, I always felt that my parents were very loving, and I felt that I had been deceived for several years. But they still insisted on divorcing and lived in two houses in the same community. Now, I go home very rarely. My wife and I go back once or twice a month and leave after a quick meal. However, after managing my own marriage, thinking back on my parents' disguise over the years, I think they are really superhuman. At 36, When I was studying for my master's degree, my father urged my mother to do IVF, but my mother refused. Later, he found a woman who was a few years older than me and gave birth to a son for him. When the child was about to be born, my parents divorced. My mother moved to my city and bought a small apartment in a business district 20 kilometers away from me. I have lost contact with my father and don't know how he is doing. He cheated on my mother and divorced her when he was almost 60 because he wanted a son. I felt strongly cheated. At 41, my parents divorced when I was about 35 years old. They have the right to live the life they want. This is their choice. But after confirming their divorce, I still cried very sadly and felt that the family was gone. My mother was depressed for 2 years after the divorce, and then she lived a free life and traveled frequently. Marriage needs to be managed well. No one is born ready to match you. At 43, my parents have been quarreling since I can remember. Although they have been married and divorced as many as 7 times, they have maintained their relationship because of raising me. It was not until I started working that they had a big fight over some trivial matters, and finally separated permanently. I was numb to the last time they separated completely. Now, my mother lives with me and my father lives with his girlfriend. Because of my parents' experience, I still have no confidence in my family and have never been married. At Siamese Cat 47 years old said, in 2007, my father proposed to divorce my mother. At that time, they were both 71 years old. My sister and I were a little surprised, but we also thought that it would be better for them to separate. So we began to persuade my mother to agree. Legally, my father could sue for divorce, but in the end, in order to convince my mother, he left the house with nothing in the division of property. They got married in 1966, and the marriage certificate had long been lost. And the civil affairs file at that time was also lost. So they first applied for a marriage certificate on the day of divorce, and then applied for a divorce certificate. My sister and I looked at the double photos on the marriage certificate and divorce certificate and realized that this might be the only photo of them in their lifetime. Now 17 years have passed. My parents are both living alone and have not remarried, and they are in good health. Both of them are nearly 90 years old and can take care of themselves. My father walks more than 10,000 steps every day, and my mother makes dumplings, pancakes, and steamed buns by herself. The relationship between the two is like a slightly disgusted relative. If there is something, you must help, but you must also complain at ordinary times. They are both very satisfied with their current lives. Their quarrelsome marriage has caused me a lot of harm. Until now, I still have a subconscious resistance to intimacy, whether it is my husband or my friends. I always seem to be in a state of packing my bags at any time so that I can withdraw before being hurt. I never share the most secret thoughts in my heart with anyone, but I am also very grateful to my parents. They have tried their best to love me and my sister. No one is perfect. Now I can understand their difficulties and sympathize with their misfortune. Life is not a cool story, and divorce is not that simple. People are always happy to praise those who have the courage to start a new life even if they are no longer young, but the complexity of life is far beyond our imagination. Many readers have written similar stories. Parents have been exhausted by each other, but for various reasons, parents still cannot separate about this topic, which is also part of the truth. After all, real life is never just a cool story. At 28, my parents have not divorced yet. When my parents quarreled when I was a child, my mother always told me with tears that if it were not for me, she would have divorced my father long ago. I seldom went home after I grew up, but once I did, I was forced to play the role of family judge, always blaming each other and chattering at the dinner table. Their marital status affected my attitude towards relationships. Later, when I fell in love, I was conflicted and tangled in my heart. I wanted to be together but was afraid. I planned how to divorce before I got married because I didn't want to become like my mother in marriage, full of resentment. In fact, people will eventually live alone. If they find themselves, they can be independent. My mother didn't realize this, and I realized it but didn't learn it yet. If one day my mother can divorce, I will be very happy. People should learn to love themselves instead of expecting others to love them. And I can finally stop taking responsibility for my mother's unhappy marriage. At 31, to be precise, my parents haven't divorced yet. My mother has wanted to divorce for a long time. According to her, she didn't divorce for me. 2 months ago, she told me that she finally decided because I was married and had children. And she wanted to live the life she wanted. Just when I was sighing that she had finally figured it out and helped her sort out all the procedures, she said, "Why don't you wait until your dad finishes his retirement?" As far as I can remember, there are no happy memories of my parents' marriage, quarrels, cold wars, and separation. They have been separated for more than 10 years, and I don't understand what the meaning of this marriage is. My parents' marriage structure is that the woman is strong and the man is weak. Due to the man's cowardice, laziness, and incompetence, the woman has to support the whole family and has absolute say. For so many years, my father has not had a stable job, and my mother has been helping him pay for Social Security. My mother is not without the material ability to live alone, but she is very dependent on a concept called home and spirit. I think people can only be redeemed if they take the initiative to leave a bad relationship, but I can't use the ideas of modern feminism to ask her to be independent and self-reliant. I just hope she can take the first step first, because once she leaves that bad environment, she has the ability to live her next life well. At 52, my dad was spoiled by my grandma when he was young. After getting married, my grandma told my mom that she should take good care of my dad in the future. Later, my grandma passed away and my mom retired. She started to dislike my dad in various ways. The two of them would quarrel when they met, or they would not say a word for the whole day. They never went out to play together. I saw something was wrong and took the initiative to tell my mom that if she wanted to divorce, I would support her unconditionally. After all, my mom still had decades of life to live, and her own happiness was the most important thing. But I also knew in my heart that if they really divorced, my dad would be a little miserable. After all, he had been well taken care of by my mother and wife since he was a child, and he didn't need to do housework. My mom didn't say whether she agreed or not at the time, but in the end she showed that she endured it with her actions, and she took care of my dad on his sick until he passed away a few years ago. My own marriage was not smooth either. I got divorced 2 years after my flash marriage at the age of 38. But after experiencing my own marriage, I realized that if marriage brings you troubles or even pain instead of happiness, divorce is the right choice. At 40, my parents did not divorce in the traditional sense. My father had Alzheimer's disease in the last few years of his life. Although my mother was in pain, she still insisted on taking care of him until he passed away. After my father passed away, my brother and I handled his funeral affairs. When buying a cemetery, my mother told us very seriously that she did not want to be buried with my father after she passed away, and she wanted to be far away. I think in a sense, this is also a divorce. My brother and I did not object. We knew how my mother had lived for so many decades. She had suffered too much. My brother and I did not say a word of persuasion. I even hoped that if my mother had not married my father, but married another person she liked, she might not have lived such a hard life. At 26, when I was a child, I asked my mother, "Why don't you divorce Dad?" My father asked for a divorce more than once or twice. The most recent time was at the gate of the Civil Affairs Bureau. At the beginning of last year, my father cheated on the live-in nanny, and my mother saw it with her own eyes. After that, my mother fell into severe depression. The fact that she needed to take medication for a long time also made her realize that she was the only one who could be responsible for her body and mind. She also felt that she did not receive enough understanding and love during her illness, and this situation might cause the disease to recur. So she decided to divorce. After the divorce, they still lived together. Until one day, my father said that he was going to get a marriage certificate, and he never came back after leaving. A week later, I happened to video chat with my mother. I had never seen her so irrational. She said that she had been alone for the past week, and no one talked to her. She was going to find my father, otherwise he would marry someone else. She said that it was impossible for her to find a partner at her age, and there was no hope of having another partner. As a result, they still live together now, like a couple, just like they had been for more than 30 years. I can't blame my mother. As a woman, she has experienced the discipline of her time and the entanglement and struggle in a long intimate relationship. These have shaped her ability and inability, but I have completed the spiritual separation from them. I no longer think that the three of us are a family. My home is where I choose and where I build it.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.